Clara Whitmore had always been the quiet sort. While other girls at the boarding house in Boston gossiped about suitors, new dresses, and future husbands, Clara preferred to spend her time sketching wildflowers from the books in the library or writing letters she never sent. Words came easily to her on paper, but in person, her voice often faltered. At 22, Clara knew time was passing her by. In the eyes of society, she was nearly a spinster. Her parents, both gone now for several years, had left her little more than a modest inheritance and a shelf of well-loved novels, with no brothers to lean on, and few prospects in the city. Clara had little choice but to consider what had once seemed unthinkable, a mail-order bride. Mrs. Ainsley, the boarding-house matron, had said with a kind but firm smile, "It's not as uncommon as it used to be, dear. The West is full of men who need good women to build homes with, and you deserve a place where someone will see you." Clara wasn't sure what she deserved, but she longed for a quiet place, far from the bustling streets of Boston, somewhere the silence wouldn't feel so heavy, where she wouldn't be expected to chatter like the rest. With trembling hands, she wrote a letter. It was brief, honest, and simple. She described herself plainly: shy, hard-working, a good cook, with a love for flowers and gentle creatures. She asked for nothing but kindness in return. Weeks passed. Then, one morning, a reply came. "Miss Whitmore, your letter was unlike any I've received. You seem a thoughtful soul. I run a small cattle ranch in Wyoming Territory. It's quiet here, and the winters are long. But if you're willing, I'd be honored to have you come and share a life with me." Elias Carter. Clara read the letter 3 times before tucking it safely into her dress pocket. Elias Carter. Even his name sounded steady, solid. A month later, she stepped off the train in Sheridan, clutching a small suitcase and the lace of her bonnet whipping in the wind. Her dress was simple but clean, and her hands were clasped tightly in front. Of her, she had expected nerves, but what greeted her made her stomach twist. A tall man in his early 30s stood near the station, hat in hand. He looked around uncertainly. A woman nearby leaned over to her husband and whispered something behind a fan. Then, without even speaking to Clara, Elias was approached by another young woman, tall, confident, and smiling brightly. Clara felt like she disappeared in that moment. After a brief conversation, Elias turned toward Clara. His brows furrowed slightly. "You're Clara Whitmore?" he asked, his voice deep and quiet. She nodded, heart pounding. "You're quiet," he said, almost confused. "Yes," she whispered, looking down. He didn't smile, didn't offer his arm, just nodded again. "It's a long ride." The trip to the ranch was painfully silent. Clara tried to find her courage, but the words remained locked inside her. When they arrived, Elias helped her down but said little else. The house was modest, wooden, with wide fields rolling behind it. Beautiful, in its way, but Clara could feel the tension, even in the wind. By nightfall, it was clear. Elias hadn't expected someone like her, and Clara had come all this way, only to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. The mornings on Elias Carter's ranch were colder than Clara had imagined. Not just in the air, which carried the chill of Wyoming's open sky, but in the quiet way the house breathed, if it breathed at all. Clara woke early that first morning, as she had done all her life, and made tea in the small kitchen off the main room. The stove clanged and clattered as she figured out how to stoke it, the kettle taking its time to whistle. Her fingers were stiff with the morning cold, but the motion was familiar. Comforting. Elias came in without a word. He gave her a polite nod, then poured himself a cup of tea and stepped back out onto the porch. Clara watched him through the window, his tall frame leaning against the post, his eyes trained on the hills. He'd said barely 10 words to her since the train station. She'd heard more from the horses in the barn. She wasn't angry, only unsure. Perhaps she really had disappointed him. Perhaps he'd expected someone with more charm, more conversation, someone like the other woman from the station, tall, graceful, confident in her every movement. Elias had barely looked Clara in the eye. Later that day, she busied herself in the house. It wasn't dirty, but it was sparse. A man's house, used to quiet and simplicity. She dusted shelves, organized the pantry, and gathered wildflowers to place in a chipped jar on the table. She was setting out bread and stew for supper when Elias finally came inside. He paused in the doorway, eyes flicking to the flowers. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. Clara looked down, smoothing her apron. "I wanted to." He nodded again, then sat. They ate in silence, the only sound the clink of the spoon against the bowl. Clara gathered her courage like a fragile egg in her hands. I hope it's all right that I stay. Elias looked up, surprised. Of course. This is your home now. She swallowed. It doesn't feel that way. He set his spoon down. Clara, his voice was quiet. I'm not good with words. I'm not used to having someone here. I don't mean to make you feel unwelcome. You just expected someone else, she said, almost too softly for him to hear. A long silence followed. The kind that carried weight. I expected someone. Louder, he admitted, then winced as if the words had betrayed him. But that doesn't mean I don't want you here. Clara nodded, unsure of how to respond. She was shy, yes, but not fragile. She could work hard, and she could learn to live in this strange new world. What she needed was a chance. The next day, she went out to the barn. The horses snorted as she stepped inside, the smell of hay and leather greeting her like an old friend. Clara had always liked animals. They never needed small talk or charm-only kindness. Easy now, she whispered to a skittish mare, her hand steady as she reached out. The horse lowered its head slowly, breathing her in. Elias entered a few minutes later and stopped in his tracks. Clara was brushing the mare's flank with gentle, practiced strokes. She doesn't usually let folks near her, he said. Clara smiled. She's not so different from me. He tilted his head, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth for the first time. Maybe not. They spent the afternoon in the barn, not talking much, but working side by side. Elias showed her how to mend a broken fence post and how to measure oats for the horses. Clara listened carefully, nodding, learning. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the fields, Elias stood by the fence and looked out toward the road. She was on the same train as you, he said suddenly. The other woman, she'd written me too. I hadn't expected her to show up. Clara froze, her heart thudding. She left the next day, he added. Said the ranch was too quiet, too lonely. He glanced over at her. You stayed. Clara met his eyes for the first time without looking away. I came here for more than noise. Elias gave a small nod. Maybe you're the one who understands this place best. Clara didn't reply, but something inside her began to settle, the wind dying down after a long prairie storm. The days began to take on a gentle rhythm. Mornings brought crisp air and warm bread. Afternoons were spent tending to the animals or helping Elias with repairs around the ranch. Evenings were still quiet, but less strained. Clara found herself growing used to the silence, not the kind filled with uncertainty, but the peaceful kind that followed shared work and small smiles. Elias had started speaking more. Not in great torrents of words, but with calm remarks, the occasional story, or small observations. He told her about the ridge where deer liked to gather at dusk, and the wind that always came from the north before a storm. Clara listened closely, offering her own thoughts when she could, though she still chose her words with care. One morning, while Clara was hanging laundry on the line, a wagon approached from the south road, kicking up dust in its wake. Elias stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. That'll be Jonas from town, he said. Brings supplies once a month. The man driving the wagon was wide-shouldered, with a cheerful grin and a loud voice. Elias Carter, thought you'd forgotten to order sugar again? He laughed, jumping down from the seat. His eyes found Clara. And who's this? This is Clara. My Elias hesitated. My wife. Jonas tipped his hat. Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. You're a quiet one, ain't you? Clara gave a small smile. I suppose I am. Well, don't matter none. Quiet folks are often the ones worth listening to. He handed Elias a crate. And how's life treating you both? Elias glanced at Clara. We're managing. Jonas grinned. That's rancher talk for good as gold. Clara helped carry the boxers inside, while Jonas and Elias talked about crops, cattle, and the coming winter. She noticed how Elias's posture was straighter now. How he glanced her way occasionally, as if to check she was still nearby, still willing to be here. But as the wagon rolled away, leaving them in the settling dust, something in Jonas's words lingered. I heard someone else came looking for you too, he'd said, just before climbing back onto his seat. Miss Adeline, wasn't it? Clara didn't ask who she was. She didn't have to. That night, as she folded linens near the fire, Elias cleared his throat. You've been real patient with me, he said quietly. Clara looked up. It's not hard to be. He nodded slowly. Jonas mentioned Adeline, the other woman who came. She was lively, outspoken. I think folks expected me to marry someone like her. Did you? Clara asked. Elias rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know. Maybe once, but she didn't want this life. She wanted town dances and neighbors and a man who talked more. He paused, looking straight at Clara. You don't ask much of me, but you give so much. Every day, Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. I just want to be useful. You're more than useful, he said, voice low. You belong here. For a moment, silence fell between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of things they didn't quite know how to say yet. That Sunday, Elias hitched the wagon and asked Clara if she wanted to ride into town for church. She hesitated. Crowds made her nervous, and unfamiliar places even more so. But she nodded. I'd like that. The small white church on the edge of town was filled with soft hymns and curious glances. Clara sat beside Elias, hands folded tightly in her lap. As the service ended, a familiar voice drifted through the noise. Well, Elias Carter, said a sweet lilting voice. You finally settled down. Clara turned. There stood Adeline tall, golden-haired and dressed in a violet dress that shimmered even in the modest light. I see you found someone quieter than most, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elias's jaw tensed. Clara's exactly who I needed. Adeline's eyes flicked over Clara. If you say so. The ride home was silent again, but not in the way it used to be. Elias looked straight ahead. But his hand brushed Clara's lightly on the seat between them, a small, steady gesture that said far more than words. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, Clara felt something deep and sure settle in her heart. She was no longer just surviving, she was beginning to belong. The air had a different weight to it that week. The wind, usually playful or still, now carried a sharpness Clara could feel in her bones. The sky changed too brighter in the mornings but dark by noon, like the land was holding its breath. Elias noticed it first, standing at the edge of the field with his hat low over his brow. Storm's coming, he muttered. A big one. Clara joined him, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Can we ride it out? We'll have to. There's no outrunning it. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. You sure you're up for this kind of life, Clara? She looked out at the land, her hands clasped in front of her. I came here to stay. Storms don't change that. Elias gave a single nod, as if the answer both surprised and comforted him. The wind rose that night, rattling the windows and howling across the empty fields. Clara couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, watching the trees bend and sway under the moonlight. Behind her, the fire crackled and hissed as rain began to hit the roof. Elias appeared quietly in the doorway of the bedroom. You all right? I've never seen a storm like this. They come through once or twice a year. You learn to respect them. She turned to him. And fear them. He shook his head. No. You learn to listen to them. They sat together near the fire as the storm raged. It was strange, Clara thought, how storms outside could make the inside feel warmer, safer. She felt it then, the bond between them, fragile but real, shaped by quiet moments and hard truths. Do you ever regret this life? She asked softly. Elias leaned back, thoughtful. Some days. The work is hard, the land unforgiving. But when the sun comes back out, when the sky clears and the horses run again, no, I don't regret it. And do you regret me? Her voice trembled slightly, though she didn't mean it to. Elias looked at her, steady and sure. No, Clara, not even for a moment. By morning, the storm had passed, but it left behind a mess of broken branches, toppled fences, and a flooded chicken coop. Clara rolled up her sleeves and followed Elias outside. Working beside him through mud and wind-dried grit, the damage was worse than Elias let on. A section of the barn roof had collapsed, and one of the smaller sheds leaned dangerously to one side. Still, they worked without complaint, without panic, just a people determined to hold their world together. As the sun reached its peak, a horse from the neighbor's ranch came galloping across the field riderless. Elias frowned. That's Frank Tobin's mare. She never strays. He grabbed the reins of his own horse and turned to Clara. Stay here. I'll be back before sundown. Worry rose like a tide in Clara's chest, but she nodded. Be careful. He paused, eyes meeting hers. I always am now. Elias didn't return by sundown. Clara paced the porch as the sky faded to lavender. She stared down the empty road, her heart thudding harder with each hour that passed. Night fell like a curtain, and still no sign of him. She lit every lamp in the house and kept the fire blazing. as if he might see it across the hills. Sleep would not come. The hours stretched, long and heavy. When the knock finally came at the door, Clara's heart nearly stopped. She flung it open to find Elias mud-covered, shirt torn, one arm hanging limp at his side. "Frank's fine," he said, voice hoarse. "Horse threw me on the way back." Without hesitation, Clara reached for him. She helped him inside, cleaned his cuts, and wrapped his shoulder with trembling hands. "You could have died," she whispered. "I didn't," he said, eyes never leaving hers, "because I knew I had something to come back to." Clara couldn't speak, but as she sat beside him that night, her hand in his, she knew the truth. Storms came, but so did mornings. And love, quiet and slow as it was, had taken root. The days after the storm brought a strange calm. The land, though battered, began to recover. Green shoots appeared where the wind had ripped away grass, and the horses returned to their quiet grazing in the lower pastures. In the house, a similar stillness settled in. Elias's injuries, though not life-threatening, left him with a bruised shoulder and several cracked ribs. Clara tended to him patiently, refusing to let him do more than sit near the window while she handled the chores. He protested at first, grumbling softly, but always gave in when she gently placed a warm cloth on his shoulder or pressed a spoonful of stew into his hands. "You're better at this than I deserve," he said one night, wincing as she wrapped his ribs. Clara looked up. Everyone deserves kindness. He met her gaze, even a man who didn't know how to talk to his own wife. A small smile touched her lips. "You're learning." Elias chuckled softly. "You're teaching." One morning, Clara went into town alone for supplies, a task that once would have filled her with dread. But now, she rode steady, her hands confident on the reins, the breeze pulling her bonnet ribbons gently. At the general store, she chatted with Mrs. Rowan, the older widow who ran the place, and picked out fabric for new curtains. She was about to leave when a pale blue envelope caught her eye on the counter. "Mail came in this morning," Mrs. Rowan said. "Got one here for you." Clara took the letter slowly. The handwriting was familiar. Too familiar. Her hands trembled slightly as she slipped it into her satchel and rode home. Back at the ranch, she stood by the window, the envelope unopened in her hands. The name on the corner, Miss Clara Whitmore, was written in the precise, flowing script of her cousin Abigail. She hadn't heard from Abigail in nearly 2 years. Not since before she left Boston. They'd been close once, raised like sisters after Clara's parents died. But Abigail was everything Clara was not. Outgoing, polished, ambitious. Their differences had grown into silence, and silence had grown into distance. With a steadying breath, Clara opened the letter. "Dearest Clara, I hope this letter finds you safe and well. Word reached us through one of Father's associates that you'd left Boston and taken up with a rancher in the Wyoming territory. I must admit, I was shocked but also impressed. I never imagined you had such courage. I'm writing not to scold, but to reconnect. Life here is dull in its own way. Father is pressing me to marry a banker, but I envy your freedom, Clara. I envy that you followed your own path. If you ever return, there's room for you here. And if not, I would still love to hear how you are. You were always more than people saw." With affection, Abigail. Clara folded the letter slowly and placed it on the table. Her chest felt heavy, not with sadness, but with something deep realization. She had spent most of her life being overlooked. Even Abigail, as kind as she was, had never truly seen her, not until she disappeared. That evening, Elias noticed her quiet mood. "Bad news?" "No," Clara said, shaking her head. "Just a memory from before." He waited, not pressing, just listening. "My cousin," she said at last. She was always the one people noticed. "She's written to say she's proud of me, I think. Or maybe surprised." "Surprised you made it out here?" Clara nodded. "And that I stayed." Elias leaned forward. "Why did you?" She thought about it. The silence, the wind, the slow smiles and quiet dinners. The way Elias had come to know her, not by what she said, but by what she did. "Because no one here asks me to be anything I'm not," she said. "And for the first time, that feels enough." He reached across the table and gently took her hand. "It is enough. More than enough." Outside, the wind moved through the grass like a whisper. And inside, Clara felt her roots deepened, not just into the soil of the ranch, but into the steady, growing trust between them. Summer came late to the prairie that year. The days were hot, but the rains were sparse. Dust clung to every window, and the earth cracked beneath the hooves of the cattle. Elias watched the sky each day, hoping for a cloud, a breeze, even the faintest roll of thunder. But it remained stubbornly blue. Clara noticed the changes, too, not just in the weather. But in Elias he grew quieter again, more withdrawn. His eyes spent more time scanning the fields than meeting hers. At night, he often stood by the porch long after she'd gone to bed. Then, one afternoon, a stranger rode up the path. He was a tall man in a city coat, with polished boots and a silver-tipped cane that didn't match the dust around him. Clara was in the garden when he arrived. Elias met him at the gate. "I'm looking for Elias Carter," the man said. "You've found him. I'm Walter Green. I represent the Great West Railroad." Clara wiped her hands on her apron and came closer. "We've been surveying land in this area," Mr. Green continued, "and your property happens to sit on a line of particular interest to us." "I'm not selling," Elias said flatly. "We're prepared to offer a fair sum. More than fair. We'd compensate for the acreage, rebuild elsewhere if needed." Elias shook his head. "My father built this ranch. I'm not moving it for a railroad." Green smiled politely. "I understand your sentiment. But sentiment doesn't pay off debts." Clara's stomach tightened. "Debts?" Elias stiffened, but didn't respond. The man tipped his hat. "I'll leave you to consider it. But I suggest you don't wait too long. Time favors those who act quickly." With that, he turned and rode off, disappearing into the horizon. Inside the house, the silence stretched. "You didn't tell me," Clara said quietly. Elias rubbed the back of his neck, eyes heavy. "It wasn't supposed to matter. Debt never stays quiet." "Elias, how bad is it?" He hesitated. "After last winter's loss, I had to take out a loan to keep things going. Then the storm hit, and we're behind. More than I planned." Clara sat down slowly. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't want you to think you made a mistake coming here." She looked up, hurt flickering in her eyes. "This is my home too." He sat beside her. "I know that now, but at first, I wasn't sure you'd stay." Clara reached for his hand. "It didn't come all this way to give up when things get hard." He held on to her tightly, his grip rough with emotion. "I don't want to lose this place. Not after everything." "Then we'll fight for it," she said simply. Together. Over the next few days, Clara surprised even herself. She went over the books in the ledger, learning where every coin went. She rode into town and spoke with Mr. Tobias, the old banker who had known Elias's father. She brought eggs and fresh vegetables to trade at the store. She even offered to teach a few of the younger ranch wives how to bake bread the way she'd learned in Boston, small steps, but they added up. One evening, Elias found her outside, mending a chicken wire fence. "I've never seen you like this," he said. She smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. "Like what?" "Strong. Fierce. I've always been this way," she said softly. "You just had to look closer." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm looking now." By the end of the week, Clara and Elias had managed to scrape together enough to cover part of the loan. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. When Mr. Green returned, Elias met him on the porch. "We won't be selling," he said. Green raised an eyebrow. "Even if you lose everything." Elias smiled, his arm resting gently around Clara's shoulders. "We're not losing anything. Not anymore." The man tipped his hat again, less confident this time, and rode away as the sun sank below the hills and the prairie wind stirred the grass like a lullaby. Clara stood beside Elias in the golden light. "We may not have much," he said, "but what we've got we built together." And that, she thought, was worth more than anything money could buy. The first snow of the season fell quietly, dusting the prairie in soft white. Clara stood at the window, watching the flakes drift down and settle on the land she now called home. The ranch looked different beneath its winter coat, still rugged, still wild, but somehow gentler. Like the life she'd built here with Elias. Winter brought its own challenges. The cold was biting, and the work never truly stopped. But Clara felt a warmth inside that no chill could touch. She had grown stronger, braver, more certain of herself than she ever imagined possible. That morning, Elias handed her a letter as she prepared breakfast. "It's from Abigail," he said quietly. Clara unfolded the familiar handwriting and read, carefully. "Dear Clara, I've heard from others about how you've taken on the ranch and how you and Elias have faced the storms together. I am proud of you. Proud that you didn't let fear or shyness keep you from living fully. I hope one day to visit. Until then, know that you are seen, truly seen. With love, Abigail Clara folded the letter and smiled softly. Maybe it's time I write back, she said. Elias took her hand in his. I think you have a lot to say. She laughed, a clear, bright sound that filled the room. As the months passed, Clara found herself speaking more not just with Elias, but with neighbors and friends. She joined the community gatherings, helped organize a harvest festival, and even taught a Sunday school class for local children. Her quiet nature remained, but it was no longer a barrier. It was part of who she was, a strength that held steady beneath the surface. One evening, as the prairie sun set in streaks of pink and gold, Elias and Clara stood on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket. Do you remember the first day you arrived? Elias asked. Clara nodded. I thought I was too shy, too quiet, to belong here. And now, she smiled, leaning into him. Now I know, I was just waiting to be seen. He kissed her forehead. You were always exactly what I needed. The prairie stretched out before them, endless, open, full of promise. And so was their life.